Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. It's time for the C3 stream. Hello everybody, welcome to the C3 stream. I would say Merry Christmas because it's like, a day or two away. Very exciting. Tonight is Tuesday night teaching. It's a chance for us to get together and hang out, spend some time together going through a biblical study. This is a pre-recorded stream, so I am actually recording this early. On Tuesday night when this is airing, I'm actually going to be at a wedding rehearsal. So this is going to be a pre-recorded stream, everybody. That means that if you are asking me questions in the moment, I cannot respond the way that I usually would. Okay, and so I have tried to make note of that in one of the graphics. It's just a reminder for you that I would love to be in conversation with you. My favorite thing actually is when we're able to be in conversation and kind of talk back and forth. But tonight, just because of timing and the way this is all working and Christmas and everything, I'm at a rehearsal for the moment. But that doesn't stop us from getting together and the importance of continuing the biblical story. We got the divine drama to cover, people, right? So grab your Bible, grab something to drink. I've got a hot cup of tea with myself right now. Been looking over my notes, kind of jogging my memory. Last week, we're going to go back through and jog your memory of what we covered, because this is really part 2 of what we talked about last week. And last week, we covered an entire book of the Bible. Today, same thing. We're going to cover an entire book of the Bible tonight. So that's fun. Let's do it. You guys ready to jump on in and quite literally try to cover an entire book of the Bible in the next hour? Let's do it. Sweet, there you go. This is where we left off last week. Diving into, we're on the precipice of this graphic and what this has to do with. But last week, what we covered was the book of 1 Samuel. And so you can always go back. If you missed it, no big deal. You can go back and rewatch those. They're on YouTube. They're also located on Facebook. They're in the community page as well as my personal page. You can go back and you can find them. But what last week was is setting the stage then for this week. It's kind of part 1, part 2, because that's actually the way that the biblical book is written. Like, it's intentionally written as actually one big book. So when you go into the table of contents of your Bible, you will see things like 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. If there's a 1 and a 2 in the Old Testament, it means that it was written as one big book. But it was so big that the editors decided to find a place where they could slice it in 2 to make it a little bit more manageable. And so we weren't, talking about like the book of Samuel, chapter 722, verse 6. It makes it more manageable. So that's what they did, is they broke the book of Samuel into 2 parts. Last week, the first part of Samuel's story, or the book of Samuel, Samuel 1, has to do with the beginning of Israel becoming an official kingdom. And the way that they do that is by having a human king. We talked about last week that there is a great tension. The Israelite people are looking at all these powerful and strong nations around them, in part because they did not completely destroy them previously under Joshua. But they're looking at all of these nations around them that have grown in size and grown in power, and really the area and territory under Israeli control had shrunk. Okay? The indigenous tribes and the indigenous people that were originally at the time of Joshua kind of pushed out have come back in strength and in numbers, along with their religion, or along with their priorities, their culture, their practices, etc., etc. And it's running havoc in the Israeli life. And the Israelites, the Hebrews, the Jews, all the same thing. Hebrew, Jew, Israelite, all the same thing, just different names. I know it's complicated. the Israelites are looking at these other nations and they say, they all have kings, human kings. We should have a human king too. And maybe if we had a human king, then we would be strong like they are. Of course, the problem with this is that theologically, in regards to faith and in regards to how Israel is supposed to live, they already have a king. The king's name is God. God's the king, which shows the deeper layer, the deeper issue, the more significant problem here. The problem here is that the Israelite people at this point in time in the narrative have stopped looking to God as their king. They've stopped following God's laws. They have stopped being faithful. They have begun to adopt and succumb to the influence, the practices, and even the idols and the religions of those indigenous people. The Canaanites, the Philistines, the Amalekites, the Ammonites, a bunch of ites out there, Edomites. The indigenous people and their way of life has become increasingly the norm for the way in which Israelites think. And this, of course, is counter to the whole idea that God was trying to establish a nation unto himself, a nation that would be a light to the rest of the world, a nation that is set aside so that when other nations look at them, they're like, wow, they live differently. Must have to do with their God. We should find out more about them and their God. The reverse is what has happened. God set aside his special people, the Jewish people, and then they turn around and now want to be like all the other nations of the world. So God's intention has not been fulfilled. It has been flipped in the other direction. This is perfectly kind of comes to a head when they say, we want a human king. That if we have a human king, that'll fix all of our problems. And they had problems. They had the fighting externally, fighting internally. We go back to the book of Judges and we saw how messy that was. So things are not, this is not a highlight reel moment of the Israelite people. And the solution, the fast fix, is a human king who will solve the problems. God gives permission through the prophet or through the priest, the spokesman Samuel, and says, fine, you want a king? I'll let you have a king, a human, messy king. So King Saul is the very first king of ancient Israel. And last week was all about King Saul. Starting off faithful, but very quickly he himself succumbs to the practices of the indigenous people and rejects God's command. God says, yep, knew that was going to happen. Yeesh. Fine, I will replace him with someone else. Because ironically, the Israelites, the people, really are the ones who chose Saul. They look at how tall Saul is, how strong he looks, how big and physically imposing. He looks like a king, they think. He should be a king. He's head and shoulders taller than anyone else. And God's like, face palm, right? Like, nah, you got to be kidding me. But okay, all right, this'll teach you guys. When you put your hopes on a broken person, a broken human, you'll learn. And they, Saul starts okay, but eventually rejects God. And as a result, God rejects him as king. Says, Saul, I'm going to replace you. I'm finding myself a new king. I'm finding myself someone whose heart, whose spirit is going to be in tune with me. There's this famous line, we revisited it briefly last week, which has to do with how God looks at the human heart and not at the exterior. That God's primary focus has to do with your character and your heart, first and foremost. And so while the Israelite people chose Saul because of how he physically looked, God ends up choosing a second king to replace Saul based on the heart. And that is none other than King David. Yay, King David! There's David looking at you right there. King David. Now, King David ain't king yet, though. As we saw last week, he has to go through a series of life events that is very messy and really ends up actually serving under Saul. Under Saul, he is a musician. The Bible says he's kind of ruddy. He's a shepherd boy. He's an outdoorsman. He ends up being the top general in ancient Israel. So he becomes Saul's go-to guy. When Saul needs a battle won, a rebellion put down, he needs a W over the Philistines, he sends in David with David's band of merry men. And David and his warriors go in, they fight the battles, and they bring home the W. Now, this causes increasingly tension between David and Saul, though, as Saul's popularity drops. David's popularity begins to skyrocket, and it becomes a laughable joke that there's such a difference between the two of them, so much so that the women start making up songs about how different David and Saul are. Saul kills his thousands, David kills his 10,000s. And so Saul all of a sudden becomes jealous of David. He marries his daughter, Michal, to David in order to keep David in line. He figures, hey, he's not going to be a threat to my throne if he's part of the family. He'll support me, and he'll stay in his box, he'll stay in his lanes if he's part of the family. So he marries off his daughter as more or less bribery to get to pacify, to get David to be complacent. It's messy. It is messy. And ultimately, it doesn't work. Saul's mental health and well-being spirals out of control, and he starts trying to kill his new son-in-law. He throws a spear at him. He has a plot to kill him. David's wife, Michal, Saul's daughter, ends up saving David and getting him out of a window, and David goes on the run. From there on out, David is a bandit. He is, we used the analogy last week of Robin Hood, and that's really what happens. He becomes Robin Hood, where he's the one everybody loves. He's the one where everything seems to be going right. And he's the one who keeps rescuing and saving people. He keeps proving with his merry band of men that he is the better fighter, and he continues to fight all the enemies of Israel on behalf of Israel, despite the fact that the king of Israel, Saul, wants him dead. So there's this whole cat and mouse thing that goes on, and there's all these stories of how Saul chases David all over the countryside. And David just keeps doing his thing. He evades Saul from behind, fights the Philistines in front of him, and all the while, the people in the populace just love him more and more and more. I mean, come on, what's not to love about this guy? He's handsome, he's rugged, he's a musician. You know what I'm talking about? He's even got like this soft side to him. The ladies swoon with this guy. He's a general, he's a fighter. I mean, it's David. And David develops an ongoing relationship with God that is healthy and good. It ain't perfect. He does some stuff that you're kind of like, David? Wow, that was gutsy. Not sure that I would have done that. But as a whole, David is a really solid dude. Eventually, King Saul goes way up north to a mountain called Mount Gilboa and fights a fight he cannot win and dies. He gets killed by some of the Philistines way up north. He dies, as well as his heir to the throne, Jonathan, his son, who happens to be one of David's best friends and also helped David escape. Saul, Jonathan, dead. And so the natural inclination at this moment in time in the narrative, this story, is kind of like all eyes are on David. I mean, the country is David's for the taking. The country has been wanting and waiting for David to step into the role of king. God himself has promised David, that David will be king. He is what we refer to as anointed. He had oil dumped on his head. So in the eyes of God, in the eyes of people, David is next in line. It's his for the taking. That's where we finished the story last week. That's a pretty good summary. So, picking it up where we left off. Let's go into the Bible. I love taking you guys into the text itself. So, let's do that. Okay. So, here is where we pick up in 2 Samuel. So, the breaking point between 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel is Saul's reign. Saul as king comes to an end. That's the end of 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel picks up right there. Okay? So the editors just kind of like drew a line, basically. So 2 Samuel chapter 1 is where David learns that Saul died. Now, for most people, you would assume that when David learns of Saul's death, he would be like thrilled, right? I mean, because he's going to be king now. It's his for the taking. All he has to do is kind of declare himself king. I mean, this should be like exciting for David. He's about to become king of Israel. That's what you would expect. But interestingly, we learn a lot about David's heart. And remember, previously, he had chances to assassinate Saul and had declined. He had chances to take Israel by force, by violence, but had declined. So here he now responds to the news of Saul's death. And this guy shows up. A man arrives, a messenger. Basically, a messenger comes. David's like, "Where'd you come from?" He said, "I escaped from the Israel camp." "What happened? Tell me how the battle went." "Our entire army fled from the battle. Many of the men are dead, and Saul and his son Jonathan are dead." Okay, so he hears that he's dead, and there's a little bit more that goes into this stuff, but basically the guy, the messenger that comes, ironically, is the guy that helped, that basically killed Saul and Jonathan. Saul commands him and says, Saul basically commits military suicide. That's what happens. Saul commits military suicide. And so this messenger, who happens to be an Amalekite, oh, now I'm second guessing myself because I did not review that before I did it. Let's double check, everybody. Philistines, I'm 99% sure he commits military suicide. Maybe I'm wrong. Nope, that is another guy that I'm thinking about. Absalom, maybe. No, his hair gets trapped in the tree. Oh, no, he does. Thank you. I am right. All right. Saul takes his own sword and he falls on it. When his armor bearer realized that Saul was dead, he fell on his sword too beside the king. So Saul, his 3 sons, his armor bearer, and his troops all went that side. All died. All dead. So he kills himself. He commits ritual suicide. So the guy who shows up is one of the dudes that basically, he's one of the bad, he's a Amalekite, so he's a bad guy, so to speak. Let's read it together. I brushed up on the other stuff, but not this stuff. Okay, I happened to be on Mount Gilboa, and there was Saul leaning on a spear with enemy chariots, and everybody's closing in on him. He turned, he saw me, he cried out for me to help. "How can I help you?" I asked him. He responded, "Who are you?" "I'm an Amalekite," I told him. He begged, "Come over here and put me out of my misery, for I'm in terrible pain and want to die." So I killed him, for I knew he couldn't live. Then I took his crown, his armband, and brought them here to you, my lord. Okay, so Saul commits ritual suicide with the help of this dude, basically. David, upon hearing this news, this is what I should have been talking about. Sorry, I got off on a rabbit hole there. Rabbit holes are fun. David and his men tear their clothes in sorrow when they heard the news. They mourned and wept and fasted all day for Saul, his son Jonathan, and for the Lord's army, the nation of Israel, because they had died by the sword that day. So here's the big takeaway, and the reason that this story is in here is that David's sad. You would expect joy and dancing. I'm going to be king. I'm going to be king. I mean, the way is open for him, but he responds with sorrow. He ends up composing a funeral song. And it's not just him. He extends his sorrow to his men and to the entire people of Judah. Right? It's this big, beautiful song. However, that sorrow does not last for long, or at least it doesn't appear to. David has remorse at Saul's death, but he knows what's in front of him. So he comes before God and says, all right, what's next? What do I do next? And God commands him to go to Hebron. Hebron is the biggest, or one of the biggest cities in the southern part of ancient Israel. Let's go back to our map. So if you look here, that is David looking at you with the two eyeballs. That's the coastline. You see the coastline there of the Mediterranean Sea, basically. Yellow. The yellow in that map is territory that has been taken over by non-Jews, the indigenous people. Bad guys. Okay? The Philistines, the Edomites, the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Syrians, the Amalekites. There's this at one point. Let's go all the way back. At one point, it looked like this. The control of the territory, kind of got collapsed as time went on, got smaller. And at the time of Saul, it was only this red and purple. Red and purple is how much land they have lost to the indigenous tribes. David is from down south. He's from the purple. Okay? He's a southern boy. And so he goes to the capital of the south, the capital of the southern region. The southern region is referred to as Judah. And that is, if you go back again to, this is the time of the Judges. Judah is down south. Again, it is purple. Along with Simeon, but they kind of get absorbed over time. Judah, physically, you can see how big all that purple is. So David is from one of the largest, biggest areas of ancient Israel. And here's a huge language thing from now on. Okay? It's very confusing, so you got to pay attention to this. And the Bible will drive you nuts on this. If you don't get this. All of this is ancient Israel. However, at this point in time, the Bible and the writers begin to refer the northern part of ancient Israel as Israel. It begins to refer to the southern part of ancient Israel as Judah. Judah is only one tribe of the 12, but we're talking multiple generations have passed now. And so the south, the southern part of the kingdom, all the south gets referred to as Judah. All the north gets clumped into Israel. See how confusing that is? So when the Bible starts talking about Israel at this point in time, it means the north. I know. It's confusing. David ends up moving to Hebron in the south. And there in the south, he becomes king. David becomes king of the southern area of ancient Israel called Judah. The north, which is referred to as Israel now, declares themselves independent from David, and we see a fracturing of the kingdom. This basically means that the idea of a king lasted one king, Saul, and it was a total mess, aka God was right. By the time you get to David, you have civil war. I mean, civil war literally erupts immediately upon the first king's death. Saul dies, David declares himself king of the south, and Saul's son, biological son, is propped up as king of Israel, king of the north. And so you have two competing kings now. I mean, God knew what he was talking about when he's like, this is a bad idea, everybody. Golly. Saul's son's name is Ishbosheth. Yeah, say that 10 times fast. And he is proclaimed over Israel. This is what I mean by like king of the north, king of the south. Okay, David is king of the south. Ishbosheth, king of the north. And he's really kind of a puppet king, to be honest. The real powerhouse here is Abner. Abner is one of the historic generals that Saul counted on. He's a big shot. He is the commander of Saul's, remaining army. What remains of Saul's supporters in the north, Abner's in charge. And Abner proclaims, he goes and he finds Saul's son, and he wants Saul's lineage to stay in power because that's how he stays in power. He stays in power as Saul's chief general as long as Saul's son is in charge. So Abner's a power-hungry kind of guy. And we'll see more about Abner later. He proclaims Ishbosheth king over the north. The people of the south of Judah, however, refuse that, and they remain loyal to David. And there's an overlap of about 7.5 years. So not a short amount of time. It's not like we're talking this just lasts for a couple weeks. The north-south division we are going to see from now on, period, all the way until the Babylonian exile. There is going to be tension and fighting between north and south here on out in the Bible. You even get it at the time of Jesus. For reals, it echoes into Samaria and the implications of Samaria. You know when Jesus gives the parable of the Good Samaritan? It literally goes all the way back to this because of how things unfold in history and how Samaria comes to be has to do with this north-south split. So war starts out between Israel and Judah. Abner, that general, takes on the general of David. Joab is David's cousin, and he is the leader of David's armies. So David himself is kind of like a general, but Joab's like his number 2 guy, right-hand man. Okay, so Abner and Joab are at each other's throats because it's the general of the north versus the general of the south, basically. And fighting starts happening between the two. Fighting north and south starts kind of going back and forth. Just light skirmishes. They're just kind of skirmishing between each other. Yeah, let's go into it. Eventually, David has family, all these sort of things happen, and eventually Abner feels like he's not being well loved. Abner is looking at the situation, and he has become a powerful leader among those loyal to Saul. So Abner kind of gets, I don't want to say full of himself, but he sees himself as the influencer in the north, the guy who's calling the shots. Ishbosheth is just kind of a propped up king, okay? And that propped up king accuses Abner of sleeping with one of his father's concubines, a woman named Rizbah, daughter of Ahiah. Now, the reason that this is really big and really important is because when you, as a general, claim one of the previous king's concubines, you're making a play for the throne. That's what that is. And we'll actually see this later, too. If you start picking up, the previous king's wives or concubines, you are tying yourself to the lineage of the throne. You're making a run at the throne. And Ishbosheth sees this, and he's like, what's up with that, man? Are you kidding? No way. You're not gonna take my father's concubines. That's a slam on me as king. The idea was you marry the concubine, you make it your own, you take him in, and you're presenting yourself now as the new king. And Ishbosheth says that ain't jive. He gets in Abner's face about it, and Abner is mad. Absolutely mad. Am I some Judean dog to be kicked around like this? Basically, am I some southerner? Some lowly southern dog? Judean. That's where you get Judah and Judean. Those are tied together. So when you say, from the town, from Judah, from Judea, Judea, those are all different derivatives of the same name. Judah, south. After all I have done for your father Saul, his family, his friends, by not handing you over to you, David, this is my reward. You find fault from me. I'm not supposed to take this woman. Are you kidding me? Well, yeah, dude, you're not supposed to do that. Everybody can see through that. Are you kidding me? Well, he makes the move. I'm going to take Saul's kingdom and give it to David. Notice this. I will establish the throne of David over Israel as well as Judah. So, Abner's pompous, man. He's a power player. He knows he's a power player, and he throws his weight around. And so he threatens Ishbosheth. He ends up actually following through on it as well. David says, yeah, all right, I'll negotiate with you, but I want my wife back, Michal, who's up north, by the way. She got married off. Abner, now is the time. I have chosen David to my people, Philistines' enemies. Abner ends up running to the south. He shows up at David's capital, Hebron, right? Shows up at Hebron where David is, and David receives him. David takes him in. He says, let me go to the north. I will do everything. You can rule over everyone. In the backdrop, you got Joab, who is the competitor to Abner, and now Joab won't take it anymore. Joab hatches a plot and proves that he is just as shrewd and just as power hungry as Abner. Joab hatches a plot and kills the rival general Abner. David's mad. He's furious. He saw this as a chance to bring the kingdom together. But Abner's dead. Like, boom, done, gone. He is murdered. He gets really mad at Joab. Shortly thereafter, now you have Abner, who fled south to join David. He brought with him, the nobles, the important people from the north, saying, hey, we should all support David. The biggest power player of the north is dead. Abner dies by Joab. And now you have Ishbosheth up north, terrified, nervous, scared. He has no power in and of himself. Well, two of Abner's captains, Bana and Rechab, end up coming, and they just murder him. They just straight up, there ain't no way to, they kill him. All right? They kill him. Ishbosheth dies. There's another child out there, Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth, we will meet in a little while. He doesn't appear to be too much of a threat from the storytelling narrative style by the reality that he has a deformity of some kind. So it's not like he's going to be this big conquering general per se in the concepts of that context, right? And he's a child. He's super young. He had been raced off by his nursemaid and vanished somewhere. So, and that's, by the way, that's Jonathan's son. So basically, Ishbosheth, when Ishbosheth dies, Saul's throne And all of the north, pretty much, I mean, when Ishbosheth dies, David's in charge. David is the king. So he'd been ruling over the south. Now he absorbs all the rest of the north. Let's go back over. Yeah, David becomes king of war. So in chapter 5, all the tribes, they head down to Hebron. So everybody gathers in Hebron. All the bigwigs gather in Hebron, which is David's capital. And they acknowledge Saul was the king in the past. But, you know, you, David, were the one who really led the forces of Israel. So, okay. And God said that you would do it. So, okay. So there at Hebron, King David made a covenant before the Lord with all the elders, and they anointed him king of Israel. He's 30 years old when he began to reign. He reigns for a long time, till he's 70. This is a big deal. David is now the united king. It's referred to in the biblical scholarship as the united monarchy. He has united the monarchy once again. Now, he's got a bit of a problem, though. David has an issue. He's a southern boy. He's been ruling in the south for years, and everybody knows it. And there's been clashes with the north. So what do you do politically? What do you do? You're trying to put the country back together. It's been at civil war. Like, what do you do? He makes a big decision, and the big decision is to move the capital. It's brilliant. Shows that David was a smart cookie. David makes the choice to move the capital farther north. If he continues to rule, all of Israel from Hebron, that's going to that's a burr under the saddle of everybody up north. So he says, okay, all right, guess what? I will go out of my way and I will move the capital to a new city, a new location that's right on the border of north and south. And that is where you get the historic, and at the time it was not a big deal. It was not a big deal, big city. It wasn't a huge, important, influential city at the time, but it was at the right location. And the city is Jerusalem. You ever hear of it? The reason Jerusalem is the chosen city is way more pragmatic than you could ever imagine. It's a political move. That's why Jerusalem is Jerusalem. David attacks the city of Jerusalem, which is one of the holdouts. Jerusalem has become a holdout of Jebusites. The Jebusites are this little indigenous group on this, and it's perfectly situated. The other reason David does this is because Jerusalem is extraordinarily defensible. It's got valleys on different sides of it, and so you can literally, it's fighting an uphill battle to take the city. It's no small thing to take a highly defensible city. And bear in mind, guys, they're fighting with, spears with stone tips here, okay? Like, there's some smelting going on, there's some ironworks and stuff going on, but like, they're not charging the hill with tanks and rocket launchers. They're charging it with bow and arrows, slings and stuff, okay? So having a defensible, fortified city is of utmost priority because it's a very violent culture, and Jerusalem fits the bill. It's the perfect spot, the perfect location. It's on the northern tip of the south and the southern tip of the north. It's right in between the two, kind of in that overlapping area. It is highly defensible with valleys on multiple sides. It has walls, which were a big deal. Walls and building walls was a big deal in the olden days. I mean, stone walls. We're not just talking about like they put some sticks up. Like, it had fortifications. So a fortified city on top of a hill, basically, is in the middle of the country, is a really good move on David's part. So he spares no expense. Like, it takes him a while, but he does it. He takes the city. And he says, okay, everybody, pack it up and move. Time. This is it. We're putting down roots, everybody. So he picks up everybody important, all the craftsmen, all the stones workers, anybody who would be considered, the carpenters, the stonemasons, the craftsmen, the middle class and the upper class, anybody who's of influence. He packs them all up and he moves them to Jerusalem and basically builds a capital from scratch. He takes this little rinky-dink fortress city and establishes it as the Jerusalem that we know today. The trajectory of the Jerusalem in modern day was set way back when David said, "This is my capital." Now, on top of this hugely political and militaristic move, he does something else that is absolutely brilliant. Okay? He does another big thing, and we should talk about this. Let me find it. It's a famous story. So he captures Jerusalem. It's political. It's a military move, and then he does this. This is why he's such a good ruler. He doesn't just do politics. He doesn't just do military. He doesn't just do any one thing. He covers all his bases. There's one big outstanding part to this establishment of him as king over all Israel that really cements him as the king. He finds the ark. Way back, we talked about this like 3 weeks ago or something like that. 2-3 weeks ago, we talked about how the ark of God was the thing that Moses made in the wilderness. It's been handed down from generation to generation. It went before Joshua into the promised land. When they first conquered the promised land, they were led by the ark. Inside the ark, it is literally the most holy piece of furniture in all Jewish history, in all Jewish literature. The ark is the seat of God. God attaches himself to this piece of furniture. It's a big stinking deal. Inside of the ark, you've got the 10 commandments. Inside of the ark, you have manna, which was, the stuff from heaven. Inside of the ark, you have Moses' staff. All the really concrete, significant signs and evidence that point to God as God, they in the ark. Okay? They're in the ark. That's why it's so big. It is the definitive theological, it's their flag. Okay, it's like the flag, and there's only one of them. It's not like the American flag where you can just print them and mass produce. There's only one, and it is the symbol of the country. And if you remember, they lost it. They lost it in battle to the Philistines. Samuel's mentor Eli and his sons, Eli's sons, take the ark into a stupid, foolish battle and lose it. The Philistines take the ark and they celebrate at first that they've got the ark, right? Then weird stuff starts happening in the Philistine towns. They put it in their temple to their god. Yeah, the statue's head falls off. And everybody's like, oh, dang. That's weird. Gives me the heebie-jeebies. Like, they start breaking out in sickness with boils. And everybody's like, All these bad things start happening when the ark is there. So eventually they figure out it's the ark. The ark's got to go. They throw it in the back of a wagon. And they end up hitting the rear of the oxen, and the oxen just go like walking off with the most important symbol of the entire country of Israel in the back of the wagon. I love the Bible. It's so cool. And so they go wandering off, and they end up walking to a Jewish city where there's this guy who realizes what it is. Bela of Judah. So there's this dude who realizes what it is, takes it into his own home, and just hides it for years it's in hiding. Totally vanished and in hiding. During all the rule and reign of Saul, nobody knows where it is. David becomes king, and the first thing he does, like the first big thing he does, he gets his troops together, and he goes and gets the ark. They bring the ark and carry it with all sorts of celebration, right? The people of Israel are celebrating before the Lord, singing songs, playing all kinds of musical instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines. So it's a big to-do. It's a big to-do. There's a couple of little stories in there that are kind of neat, but David brings the Ark of the Lord to Jerusalem, the city of David. All right, his new capital. He brings the ark to the capital. This is David consolidating his power. This is David establishing himself. Nobody has any questions anymore. He is the strongest militarily with this fortress. He's the strongest politically as he balances north and south in the dynamics of north-south. And now he's established himself along with the priesthood, along with all the people who care about faith in ancient Israel. He has aligned himself with the theocratic powers, the theology, and all those who have influence in relation to faith. He brought back the ark. So all the priests are having a ball with David. They're toasting David. Any priest and any faithful Jew is hoisting a cup in honor of David, who brought the ark back to God's people and back to the center of the Jewish way of living, the Jewish life. Simply put, part of the reason why we see the reiteration that God favors David and that David is a man after God's own heart, it's because David brings to the forefront something that's been sleeping during the reign of Saul, and that is God is in charge. God is God. In fact, when you go into the Hebrew words, when you see this term king and David, it is a different word that is used when Saul's name is listed. And it's more synonymous with prince, which goes back to our historic, the issue of like who's king, who's in charge. When you get to the story of David, the author makes a conscious switch to say David sees himself as God's champion, God's voice, God's prince here on earth, not a king in his own right. And so he is bringing back faith and faithfulness to the forefront of the Jewish way of life. And for that, he is to be celebrated. Sure, he's really messy. Sure, he's got a ton of baggage. Sure, he himself does not actually live out the Jewish laws perfectly. Far, far from. I mean, do not murder. Do not kill. David's a big-time killer, murderer. He kills people for a living as a general. He's a shady character in his own right. Do not commit adultery. Yeah, as we're going to see, that proves tough for David. David is far from the shiny character, but what he does do is he brings faith to the front and the center of his life and the Jewish nation again. And for that, he's commendable. Saul did the opposite. He kind of ended up putting God on a shelf. David brings it to the forefront. So this is huge. I mean, this is absolutely massive. David ends up consolidating the practice of worship. It's the other really brilliant thing he does in both military, political, and theology, the area of religion. He says, look, everybody, you have to now worship in my capital. So in order to unite the country, all the Jews in the north, all the Jews in the south have to begin making pilgrimages to David's capital in order to worship God at the temple, at the place of meeting. He sets out and lets his intentions be known. David says, I'm going to build a temple. I'm going to build a place for God. I'm going to build a place that will house the ark, and it will consolidate our worship. So rather than having all these independent little places of worship sprinkled all over the country, he says this is the only place that you can truly worship the way that it's supposed to be done. Sure, you can be faithful in your local town. Sure, you should be praying. But when you pray, pray with your face facing Jerusalem. Sure, you can practice your Jewish way of living. You should practice your Jewish way of living. But make no mistake, you should, as part of your Jewish way of living, embrace the practice of coming and worshiping at the capital to remind yourself and experience the power and the presence of the living God. So, this is really smart too, because the local indigenous people, the religion that God is scared the Israelites are going to begin adopting, that they have historically already begun to adopt, that's just having altars everywhere. That's having an altar on every hilltop. That's why in the Psalms it says, my eyes look to the hills. Where does my help come from? That's not because God is in the hills. That's because that's the psalmist saying, I look to the hills. Does my help come from the Asherah poles and the Baal altars that are up on the hills? Does my help come from those indigenous altars and those indigenous places of worship? No. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, who happens to live and reside in Jerusalem. Thank you very much. Not many people know that psalm actually means that. Most people look at that. It's a famous reference to a psalm. And the idea, most people are like, oh, isn't it beautiful? Like, I raise my eyes to the hills. Where did my help come from? As if you're looking for, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No, the psalmist is actually drawing a contrast, because on the hilltops is where you had all the indigenous worship. The idea was you go higher up, you're closer to the heavens, you're closer to Baal, you're closer to Asherah, who are fertility goddesses and gods. So that's a little tidbit of history for you. All right. David sacrifices. He makes a bunch of hoopla with the ark coming. He does manage to really make his wife mad. It's got something to do with this Studley king dancing before everybody in just like a loincloth. She's not too happy. The wife, not happy. And that's it. It takes David, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 chapters, and now in 6 chapters, he cements himself as the king. He's king over Israel. Wow, we've already been going for 50 minutes. I gotta be fast. I am so long-winded, guys. I'm sorry. I get excited about this stuff. I repeat myself sometimes too. All right, we can't skip chapter 7 because it's so big. Here's the deal. As soon as David has this big celebration moment, he's consolidated his power. He comes before God and he says, God, I am living in a beautiful cedar palace, and yet you, God, you got nothing but a tent. I'm like in this palace, and you are out back with a, you're in a camper. That's really, I've got a palace, you got a camper. That ain't right. You're camping. And God's like, seriously? God speaks through the prophet Nathan. There's a new guy on the street. His name's Nathan. He becomes a prophet, a priest under David, and one of David's biggest supporters. He's very excited about the whole finding the ark thing. And he also manages to be the guy that really can hold David accountable, to speak truth to David. They have an interesting relationship. But this is, God speaks to David via Nathan. Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord has declared. Are you the one to build a house for me to live in? I have never lived in a house from the day I brought the Israelites out of Egypt until this very day. I have always moved from one place to another with a tent and a tabernacle as my dwelling. Yet no matter where I've gone with the Israelites, I have never once complained to Israel's leaders, the shepherds of my people. I have never asked them, why didn't you build me a house? So, David, let me just remind you. I took you from tending sheep in a pasture and selected you to be leader of Israel. I have been with you wherever you have gone. I have destroyed all the enemies before your eyes. And now I will make your name famous as anyone who has ever lived. I will provide a homeland for my people Israel, planting them in a secure place where they'll never be disturbed. Evil nations won't oppress them as they've done in the past, starting from the time I appoint judges to rule my people. I will give you rest from all your enemies. Furthermore, the Lord declares that he will make a house for you, a dynasty of kings. God has a sense of humor, and he plays on words here. God has a sense of humor, okay? Basically, David is feeling really good about himself because he's king, and he says, I got a house. God, shouldn't you have a house too? I'll make you one. I'll give you a house, God. As if David is the one who, like, you know, has the power, the ability to make God a house. As if David's actually the one in charge. This is a moment of a faux pas. This is where David stubs his toe as far as God is concerned, right? And God is just like, golly, David, I've never needed a house, okay? I've never wanted a house. I've never needed a house. I don't need no house. I don't need your stinking house. This is your priority, not mine. And this is your sense of what's important as opposed to mine. Let me tell you what I think is important. I think that me having a physical house is not important. What is important is me making you a house, right? So he plays on words. God plays on words here. He says, look, you're so jazzed at the idea of making me a house. I am going to make you and your future a house. And that word in Hebrew, house, they try to translate it here. It's dynasty. Okay, so it's kind of like God's playing on words by saying, you're talking about a physical house. I am talking about a dynasty. You're thinking small potatoes. I am thinking about the salvation of the world. It's kind of a big contrast there, but it's perfectly accurate. David's thinking about walls. God is thinking about bringing the King of Kings and Lord of Lords through David. When you die and are buried with your ancestors, I will raise up one of your descendants, your own offspring, and I will make his kingdom strong. He is the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father, he will be my son. If he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod like any father would do, but my favor will not be taken from him as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from your sight. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever. You know, in Sunday school, when somebody asks you a question, the answer is always Jesus. Guess what? Jesus. That's what he's talking about here. The whole father-son thing. Everlasting, kingdom talk. He's the one who will build a house. You are that house. You are the temple. That's you. That's the church. The church is the temple, a royal priesthood. Jesus is the cornerstone. The Bible picks up on this one passage will literally echo into the rest of the Bible. This is the Davidic promise. This is why, Jesus gets referred to. This is the whole reality with Bethlehem and Jesus being born in the South. It's all this. Even to the effect of, if he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod, like any father would do. It's not that Jesus sins, but Jesus takes our sin. Okay? So Jesus doesn't sin in and of himself, but he takes our sin. He absorbs our sin. He's like a sin vacuum. He sucks our sin from us and holds that sin within his own body and person. That's why he dies on the cross. He takes upon himself, God lays upon him the sins of the world, and golly, it's the cross that he has to go through. And yet, even as he suffers the weight of sin, our sin, as he suffers for the weight of our sin, God does not disregard him. He does not take his favor. He does not reject Jesus the way he rejected Saul. Okay? So, God remains faithful to Jesus, even as Jesus remains faithful to God, by taking our sins upon himself and embracing the cross. God does not reject Jesus, but embraces him and establishes his kingdom and throne forever. Boom. All the way back, and here we are in 2 Samuel, and we're hearing about Jesus. That's big. That's big. All right, it is. Wow, I was going to try to get through an entire book of the Bible tonight, and boy, did I miserably fail. I mean, look at all this stuff we have to go. But my timer says that I've already been talking for an hour. So that means we need to wrap up, guys. Hey, it's been a blast. And, what we talked about is actually this is all really heavy, really significant stuff. This will set trajectory for a lot of what is about to come. Part of the reason why I wanted to make sure that you understood the dynamics between North and South, and with David and the consolidation of king, and even having what's the importance of establishing Jerusalem and Jerusalem as a center of worship. All of that will be extremely important in the narrative here on out, particularly when you get into the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, which is going to follow this. And then beyond that, when we get into, you'll see. It will make sense. The reason for the minor prophets and all that sort of stuff, it all stems from here. And we see Jesus stemming from here too. That's why it was really important that we slow down a little bit and focus on today. So thanks for joining. Thanks for hanging out. Just a reminder for you, this was a pre-recorded stream for you. And so if you have made comments, I apologize for not being able to answer them in the moment. I'm at a wedding rehearsal right now. But that doesn't stop me from wanting to spend time with you and enjoy time with you and, hanging out. Hey, the biggest thing that I can share with you as we wrap up, guys, is, golly, Christmas time is here. Tonight's Tuesday. That means we have services beginning already tomorrow night. Tomorrow night is Christmas Eve. Yes, we have services on Christmas Eve. And here, let me show you. Nope, that's not what I wanted. That's what I wanted. We have services on Christmas Eve. So at 7 o'clock on the 23rd, and then 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30, 7:30 on Christmas Eve itself on Thursday evening. So that's the biggest thing, guys. Come, be a part of it. And you know what? If you are part of the Christ Church family, bring someone. Bring. This is the opportunity in the moment, unlike any other for the whole year. People are open more on Christmas Eve to come to services than any other time of the year. If you're conscious or worried about what it looks like to be on site, no worries. Go to the online experience. We will have a fully online specific, online oriented experience for people to enjoy from the comfort and from the safety of their own home. If that is you, please go to christchurchmequon.org, click on Christmas. You can find out more about what it's like on site, as well as accessing the online services. So can't wait to see you. Absolutely can't wait to worship with you and enjoy Christmas with you. Want to wish you a Merry Christmas on this stream, and really do hope and encourage and invite you to come and be a part of things. Wednesday night, 7 p.m., and then Thursday, Christmas Eve, 1 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 3:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30. 7:30 is a traditional service, if that is your jam. 7:30 is a more traditional feel and vibe to it. The rest are all going to be contemporary. So thanks for hanging out tonight. Can't wait to see you for Christmas. If I don't see you in person, please, please, please hear a very Merry Christmas from me to you. Thanks for hanging out, guys. God bless and Merry